Ladies and gentlemen, ladies. It's been so long. It's the fucking roundup. Guys, how the fuck's it going? I miss this. I miss us. I miss talking about music by myself to a microphone while staring at the recording stream. It's too beautiful. I've been away for a while, working on some personal shit, so I apologize for the long delay. I have 86 albums to talk about, some in more detail than other. Not all of them on this one episode, but I did want to preface that I am working really hard to cover all the stuff I haven't been covering since I've been away. So I'm just going to go through a random smattering of them right now, without much rhyme or reason. And the logic behind them is these are the ones I actually remember listening to as opposed to other ones where I'm going to have to go through them a second time because it's been so long. So we're just going to take some out. First off, Andrea Polli's Sonic Antarctica. It's a really interesting music concrete album that's sort of part ambient, part, like I said, music concrete, part abstract, part, I guess, audio journal about some expeditioners in the Antarctic and exploring the Antarctic, obviously the Antarctic, and doing research on ice cores and polar melting and all sorts of good stuff like that. So you get this mixture of scientists talking about these large, heady scientific concepts. You get some odd radio frequencies that just kind of blip and blop out of existence. You get some sonic tones and soft ambient music. And for an hour and 10 minutes, it's a pretty long listen. But I did enjoy it on some level that I can't quite put my finger on. The pieces come together. It definitely creates a full image of being a scientist in probably a tiny little hut on this massive continent of earth and ice, and all the pieces that surround it, and being an expeditioning out there in the Antarctic. It's a fascinating listen, kind of depressing when it's talking about, you know, how global warming and climate change are impacting things, but if you're into a sort of a music concrete, if Ken Nordine's your guy, or if you like listening to spoken word stuff, I think you'll get a kick out of it. If not, I don't think there's a whole lot to appreciate because it's kind of dense from in number one in length, and also just there's not really any actual sound of music to put a grip on. It's more of just a composite of ideas. I actually just listened to this one this afternoon. The band is Agent Fresco, and the album is Destrier. I checked this one out. It had been on my queue for a long time, but a friend of mine, Facebook 10 albums thing, put it on here saying it was one of his favorite albums. And I said, oh, well, let me bump it up to the top of my list, because if he's saying it's good, and this guy I think has fantastic taste in music, I definitely got to check it out. And I was really, really disappointed because this album is terrible. It's kind of like, I don't know, 2015, it released in 2015. It's kind of like 2015's Evanescence, this sort of heavier rock music, a little mathier, a little genty-er than Evanescence, which was a little bit more nu metal-y, but with that same very operatic, very grandiose singing style. This time it's a male singer in a higher range than Evanescence. The woman, same kind of operatic singing style, this very grandiose style. And truth be told, I've never really heard a album that I really like that has this heavier rock sound with this grand, verbose, operatic style singing. I will admit that I did like Evanescence back in high school, but beyond that, it's never clicked for me. It has this grandiose tone that I don't ever really feel matches the rock nature, the heavier nature. I understand it's supposed to give it this big, epic kind of sound, but for me to I always feel like those two styles clash and they don't actually work together. They grate against each other, and I think nothing really good ever comes of it. It's always an unpleasant listen for me. And so obviously this Destrier album by Agent Fresco was in the same light, just wasn't getting any joy out of the album. I will say, at least to its credit, compared to other types of albums like this that I've listened to, the music was a little bit more engaging. There are some, like I said, some mathier components, some time shift component, time signature changes components. It broke up sort of the monotony and less of a chugga like you would sometimes get with this type of work, but I really couldn't recommend it. I found it just a real slog, and truth be told, I gave up near the end of it. I didn't finish the last 2 or 3 tracks because I felt like I heard enough of it. I wasn't having any joy come of this music. I'm just gonna do a quick shout out on this release. It's not a formal album release, but sometimes I like to cover these. In August of 2017 at the drive-in, we did a Maida Vale session and performed 4 songs for about maybe 12 minutes worth of music, sort of a live in the studio kind of sound. A lot of people had expressed mixed feelings about this iteration of At the Drive-In. Number one, with the lack of Jim Ward, and just the quality of the performances. I disagree in the sense that I usually think these guys have still been doing a really good job, and this little 4-song set demonstrates that they still can put out really, really good performances. They can still rock, even though these guys are in their 40s now. They're a little bit older, a little bit more mature. They're no longer cracked out 20-year-olds, and I think it's still great music to listen to. They're still a lot of fun. I think if you find this recording on YouTube or a website where you may acquire some bootlegs, it's definitely worth a listen. Another one I listened to just a couple days ago was Chaos AD's Buzz Cancer. Chaos AD is a pseudonym for Square Pusher. Instead of his more traditional type of music that he does, this was more of acid techno, very abrasive and aggressive and in your face. Not a bad abrasive though, just a very over-the-top style album, released in 1998 when electronic music was still relatively in its infancy. This album is interesting because it gives this sound like it could have come out just a day or two ago. Acid electronic music was never massively popular as far as I know, and especially in this day and age, it's definitely been overtaken by deep house and similar styles of electronic music. So it's far less popular, but I think it's definitely worth a listen. Number one, if you are a fan of Square Pusher, you're entering a world of perfected production work, excellent mixing, and very creative song structures where songs will abruptly turn on a dime. They'll throw wild beats and patterns at you, so that it gives this unpredictableness to it. The songs, being acid and electronic, are incredibly fast, incredibly in your face, incredibly over the top, but never to the point of garish and never to the point of offensiveness or ostentatiousness. There's the right amount of rein being pulled on them. It's not like a sort of like a dubstep song where you're almost embarrassed to play it as you're driving through the suburbs. It's really, really good fun music. It's a great album. At 70 minutes, it's a little bit long, but if you're into this style of music, it's a great collection of this type of music to listen to. The best part is that there are a few little breaks that give the album some breathing room, give you a chance to breathe, such as the song Theme from Cumberland Wrestling, which is never anything more than just some dissonant electronic bleeps and bloops and droning that give you a chance to just settle down for a moment before things re-escalate and go ballistic again. Again, a fantastic album, definitely worth your time. Speaking of more electronic style music, I listened to 2016's REMXNG, a remix album by the experimental hip hop group Clipping. People taking their tracks and reworking them, cutting them up, and doing all sorts of weird stuff with them. Overall, I'm not a big fan of remix albums to begin with. Most of the time, I don't hear anything too exciting, too interesting that grabs me a whole lot. There's a few exceptions, like Dross Glop, the 4-part remix series of Battles' Gloss Drop album. But this one didn't do a whole lot. The song Body and Blood gets remixed way too many times, and these remixes way overuse that Body and Blood word sample. If you've never heard the original, you need to check it out. It's an amazing song that's really deep and disturbing and guttural, as most Clipping is. However, this time right from the get-go, the Fabric Nos remix of Body and Blood, it's assaultive. It's just too much of a good thing. The other part that really throws me off is these were songs that are very experimental, very dissonant, very sonically unpleasant to listen to. And in this remixed form, they're presented in a dancey sort of way, playing in a club. Now you're all of a sudden listening to David Diggs and going, oh man, now I can get down to this. Not that clipping doesn't deserve that kind of reworking and trying something different, but it takes away some of the magic of what makes clipping work so well, is that it's making hip-hop beats out of dental drills and bricks slapping together, and now it's more like a techno beat. It kind of pulls David Diggs out of his element, and all of a sudden you're losing that fantastic production work from the other two members of clipping. My apologies to you guys, I don't know your name, but it creates this it creates something that just doesn't seem to work for me overall. And it's hard to say for certain, but it's weird that clipping's dissonance works, but now this creates its own style of dissonance that doesn't really lend itself too well. I will say I believe it was the Toe Cutter remix of Work that I did like. There were moments on this album that I was engaged, I was intrigued, and went, oh, that's an interesting take on the album, but overall for an hour and 14 minutes is a whole lot to get through. Moving right along, we're going to skip over the Mountain of David Brubeck I listened to. We'll cover that another time. I'm kind of bummed I'm covering this in just such a short span of time, but I don't think we're going to get into it in a proper episode. David Byrne earlier this year released American Utopia. His latest album in, I think, about 4 or 5 years was Love This Giant, which was a collaboration album with St. Vincent that I was not a particularly big fan of. This is his first proper solo album since, I believe it was 2006 or 2007's Everything Will Happen Today, which was sort of a collaboration with Brian Eno, but primarily a David Byrne work. This is the same thing where the music is all Brian Eno music, and then David Byrne is singing over it, and I think he's adding maybe a couple little bells and whistles, but primarily it's Eno's music. He sends over to Byrne and says, all right, go have fun with this. David Byrne is a polarizing figure for me because when he's in his element, either when he was working with Talking Heads or even some of his other solo work, he is one of the greatest American musicians that's living and that has in modern history. But David Byrne also has the unique knack to also be the worst one at the same time. His penchant for quirkiness and cutesy Americana, I guess would be one way of putting it, sometimes puts him at odds with my style and my interest in music, and it becomes a little too much where he's just way too on the nose with, look at this thing that's kind of cute and unique and weird that I'm finding fascinating. If you've never seen True Stories, the movie, perfect example of that. But now we have American Utopia. Byrne goes back to what he does best. This is not sort of quintessential quirky Americana. Instead, with the help of Brian Eno, Byrne is creating something far more distinct, far more unique, and far more engaging. The album opens up with I Dance Like This, which starts off kind of mellow and pleasant. I thought that's where we were going with a milder album, kind of like his more recent ones, and all of a sudden it assaults you with this very aggressive, heavy bass hitting over and over and over again with Byrne's robotic style singing. The song Everybody's Coming to My House, the single is truly fascinating. It's got so many pieces coming together. It has this grand, epic sound without being epic. It's just all these components perfectly flowing together, perfectly combining together, that creates a song that's completely unforgettable. Other songs like Dog's Mind and Every Day is a Miracle, also the perfect blend of Byrne's idiosyncrasies, but with Brian Eno's very strange, haunting music. Byrne and Eno are a perfect collaborative team. All three of the albums they've put out together are all fantastic and all do something really unique and special, whether it's Everything That Will Happen Today's near perfect pop style music with a wisp of alternative dysphoria, My Life in the Bushes of Ghosts, experimental music, Concrete Patchwork, or this one, which again is a mixture of dissonant electronica and popness, but plus Burns's dry, witty lyrics and vocal work. Of Montreal is a Georgian synth pop band that has been around for quite a while with a massive discography. They had gained some large popularity a few years ago, around I think it was around 2008 to 2010, with they have some albums that gained a lot of popularity, such as Hissing Fauna, Are You the Destroyer, the Sunlandic Twins, Icon Tree, Abstract Tree, and Satanic Panic in the Attic. Now they've really kind of vanished from notoriety in recent years, sort of fallen on a favor with as a Pitchfork darling, as synth pop, synth rock has. Now they're here with a new album, White is Relic, is Irrealis mood, and I don't know. I never really liked of Montreal to begin with. I kind of found them never quite really hitting the full punch. It always felt a little reserved, a little pulled back, synthy, audacious, but never quite off the rails, and saying that it seemed to want to be, but just never quite was there. This album has a similarness to it. It feels very middle of the road, very samey, kind of absent of ideas. There's only 6 tracks, I guess 12 maybe, depending on how you look at the album. Each track is sort of split in 2. So, for example, you have the intro soft music / Juno Portraits of the Jovian Sky. And each track ends up running pretty long, obviously, considering the full runtime. And each track, I'm sitting there going, if you shaved a little bit of time off each one, you'd have sort of a decently sounding EP, but everything kind of just goes on and on and on, and a lot of times it doesn't really feel like it's ever gaining a whole lot of traction or really sounding that interesting or appealing, especially on the later end, such as if you talk to Symbol / Hostility Voyeur, it's kind of just existing. And it's dull, and it's nothing grabs you. It's just kind of middle of the road synth pop kind of work, a little more dark and drab compared to some of the other stuff I've heard by them. By no means an expert on them, but from what I know of Montreal, this felt a lot more subdued in comparison, and it's very forgettable. That's the biggest thing. I listened to this album about 2 months ago. I gave myself a quick refresher, and I'm like, I don't remember any of this. And I think it's just sort of a testament to just how meh the album is, and how you really are not missing a whole lot by skipping it. I'd say you don't need to have this album in your life. I've basically already forgotten its existence, and I could easily move on from it. Another album that sort of touched on the synth tones was Franz Ferdinand's Always Ascending. Franz Ferdinand is one of my favorite bands. I think they're just a wonderful band to listen to. Their first 3 albums, self-titled, You Could Have It So Much Better, and Tonight Franz Ferdinand, are some true classics. And later out in the subsequent album, Right Thoughts, Right Words, Right Action, is also another treat as well. I'm not super as familiar with it. Now we have album number 5, which is a lot more synth heavy, a lot more stripped down, and kind of a step away from their Brit rock sensibilities. Franz Ferdinand came out in an era where multiple British rock bands were coming out clamoring to be on top of this wave of Brit pop rock, almost like a resurgence of the British invasion. These sort of thin, vogue, heroin chic kind of guitarists playing jangly rock tunes with morose lyrics. And although many bands entered that competition, like Franz Ferdinand, including Block Party, Kaiser Chiefs, and the Libertines, most of them, even though they're still together, have kind of been forgotten. Just due to time and time has passed and changing trends. Franz Ferdinand has survived and continues to record. They have a new 5-piece lineup, touring now in 2018. I just saw them recently. They were put on an amazing live performance. I can say that much for sure. This new album, Always Ascending, like I said, it steps away from the traditional Franz Ferdinand mold. I respect that choice, as the band had kind of perfected what it was doing for the past 4 albums, nearly over a decade length of recording material. So it's natural that they were going to kind of step away and do something different. The end result, though, Always Ascending, it feels bare, it feels sparse. There's a couple tracks, Lazy Boy and Always Ascending, that are kind of engaging. it never feels like it really kind of grabs me the way other Franz albums have. A lot of songs feel kind of sparse or just kind of unfinished in a way, and a lot more down tempo, slower songs. You obviously have the song like Demagogue. It was a bonus track, but worth listening to. That's sort of an anti-Donald Trump anthem that, again, none of these songs quite have the bite that classic Franz Ferdinand has. I think it's a fair direction for them to go. As much as I'm kind of tired of bands trying to do electronic work to kind of compete with the new burgeoning fad of DJs, they seem to be trying it in a slightly less on the nose way, where it's just clearly they swapped out all the regular instruments for synthesizers. This is sort of a blending of the two genres. It just never seems to quite connect the way you wanted it to connect. Like I said, the opening track, Always Ascending, is a real enjoyable song, and it has sort of this interesting piece to it, where the synth constantly worrying up, is slowly getting higher and higher pitched over the entirety of the song nearly. It doesn't have it, so it kind of is always pulling you up. And then you get to this first single, Lazy Boy. It's mellow, sort of down tempo. It's chill. It's not a bad song. And if things started to pick up after that, I would be really on board. But it just kind of feels like nothing really ever kind of then jumps at you afterwards. It sort of has a ploddingness to it. I'll give credit to Feel the Love Go. It's another good song. Has almost a gospel-y kind of sound to it that is a little bit different from the rest of the band, or rest of the album. But overall, compared to their other work, I didn't really find myself enjoying it. When I listened to it live, I definitely warmed up to it. I thought it was a lot better. But overall, they just have far better work. And this just seems sort of like a misstep. Maybe they just weren't sure what they wanted to do. Maybe they just were experimenting with something that didn't quite work. I know they swapped out one of their original guitars for another musician. Just this being sort of a new switch. Maybe they just quite haven't found their grounding yet. So it's a bit of a bummer, because I really like Franz Ferdinand. I always thought they were very creative, very engaging, even if they're just sort of, I guess you could call them simple Britpop, but they always had exciting albums to listen to, and they're always a lot of fun. So this one was just sort of a dud. I wouldn't recommend it. Maybe check out the singles, but that's about as far as I could go. All right, we've tackled a lot so far. We have so much more to cover, but let's leave it at that. Though the roundup will be back soon, and we'll be discussing some more albums.